Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is an interview series in which I talk to the people behind some of my favorite movies. From cult movie directors to character actors, from seasoned veterans to brilliant newcomers, from celebrated artists to filmmakers who haven't received the recognition they deserve. These folks have lots of fascinating stories to tell. Today's guest is screenwriter John Orloff, who worked with German director Roland Emmerich on the movie Anonymous, a very complex and fascinating historical drama about the theory that William Shakespeare may not be the author of the works of William Shakespeare. Instead, the movie claims that the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, wrote famous plays like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, and that through complex political scheming he wasn't able to receive credit for them, but instead a hapless young actor, William Shakespeare, served as a front for him. In our interview, John discusses the long process of developing the script, which began with a completely different take on Shakespeare. He talks about his collaboration with Roland Emmerich, which added many new elements to the story, and about the intricate structure of the film, which Orloff himself says may be a little bit too complicated. He discusses the angry reactions and reviews the movie received, and he talks about why he believes that Shakespeare isn't the author of the plays, and why discussing the authorship issue is a worthwhile debate. John also discusses some of the other projects he's worked on, like the Band of Brothers miniseries, which was produced by Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, and he talks about some of the guiding themes of his work. The interview was done in connection with our Lichtspielplatz podcast on Anonymous, so if you speak German, check out episode number 40 of our Lichtspielplatz podcast with an in-depth discussion of the film and its themes. You can find us at talkingpicturespodcast.com. So here is Talking Pictures with screenwriter John Orloff.
I first learned about the whole Shakespeare authorship issue sometime in the 90s. And at the time, I was working in advertising, making TV commercials as like a crew member, doing just anything. And I met my now wife, who at the time was working at HBO in the late 90s. And she would bring home these scripts. And at the time, in particular, in the late 90s, HBO was making a lot of sort of historical movies. You know, they would make a movie about Don King, the American boxer guy, or just biopic after biopic after biopic. So Paige, my now wife, would bring home these scripts that tended to be sort of nonfiction based. And I read them and they weren't terribly good, some of them. So I thought, well, I could write a script. I mean, I had gone to UCLA Film School. I had studied film. But I was working in advertising and had no idea how to become a filmmaker. Anyway, so I sort of pitched my wife the Shakespeare authorship issue, and she said, well, you know, you got nothing to lose. Why not write it? So that was probably in like 95 or 96, I want to say. And it took me a couple of years to write. I did just a ton of research. I love research. And yeah, and I finally finished it around 98. And about one of my first big breakthrough ideas was, I'm going to make William Shakespeare young and sexy. And that had never been done before. And literally, I finished the script, and 2 months later, Shakespeare in Love came out. With the young, sexy Shakespeare. So I wrote it in the late 90s. And then I got very lucky. Somebody who worked for Tom Hanks read the script and really liked it, and had me come in for a meeting. And while obviously that group of people never made the movie, they really liked me, and they ended up hiring me to write on Band of Brothers, which was my first paying gig as a writer. So yeah, so that's sort of the background of the script, and then pretty much nothing happened for 4 or 5 years until I got a phone call from my agent, who is also Roland Emmerich's agent.
Hmm.
And Roland was looking for a writer for a film called The Day After Tomorrow, and he wanted to meet with me. So I went to his office, and Roland starts talking about um, The Day After Tomorrow. It's the winter, and we have the snow, and it's Fifth Avenue, and this giant boat goes down to Fifth Avenue, and the snow, and he's going on and on and on. And I said to him, "Wow, that sounds awesome, Roland, but that's not. I don't know how to write that kind of movie. There's really much better guys to write that kind of movie." And I don't think Roland hears that very often. Somebody saying, "No, I don't want to write your movie," um, and he was sort of surprised, and he sort of went, "Really? Hmm. Well, what else have you written?" And so I said, "What the fuck? I'll just pitch him my 17th, 16th century Elizabethan melodrama." So I pitched Roland Emmerich my 16th century Elizabethan melodrama, and he asked to read it. And 2 weeks later, he purchased it 100% with his own money.
Wow. It is a very unusual project for Roland Emmerich. Although I used to joke that, this is the guy who's destroyed the White House and the Chrysler Building and New York and half the Earth, and now he's destroying the Shakespeare biography.
Exactly. No, completely, completely. There's actually a really, in the sort of Shakespeare um, dialogue about who wrote the plays, there's actually a lot of Germans who got very into it as well. So there's a whole German school of thought about the Shakespeare authorship question.
Hmm.
Um, so he might have pinged into that. And the thing about Roland is he is a very, very smart man, very intellectual. His movies might not always be that, uh, but that's intentional.
Mm.
He makes the movies he wants to make. You know, so yeah, so that's how it started. So once he bought the script, he started to do his own reading and his own research, and because my original script was pretty different, 50% the same, excuse me, and 50% new that Roland brought to it. So yeah, so then we spent a couple of years me rewriting it because as I'm sure you've noticed if you've seen the film, it's a very complicated structure,
Hmm.
slightly too complicated, I think. You have to really watch the movie once, more than once, to really understand a lot of the subplots and who's who. Yeah, so the movie really evolved with Roland's input, becoming a lot more political.
Hmm.
Um, Most of the political elements were not in the original draft.
Hmm. Interesting. Because I was going to ask how the movie evolved, and you said that you had a young and sexy Shakespeare in your first version, and I mean the
Yeah,
Shakespeare in the movie now is anything but. I mean, he's a drunken buffoon basically.
yeah. Again, it evolved. Roland is really into collaboration, and I'm really into it, and so it just grew. I mean, the first thing that Roland really brought to it was the succession issue, like who would rule after Elizabeth.
Hmm.
In my original draft, the script was originally called Soul of the Age, which is what Ben Jonson called Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
He called Shakespeare the soul of the age. And so Soul of the Age was much more just about the relationship between William Shakespeare and Edward de Vere, with Elizabeth having a much reduced role. And then Roland read about the succession issue that possibly Elizabeth was the parent of the Earl of Essex, which is why the Earl of Essex started the Essex Rebellion, and possibly Elizabeth was the parent of Edward de Vere, blah, blah, blah. I never bought that historically in any way, shape, or form, but it's a movie, and it was really interesting dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
That said, it became one of the number one things that people would point out about why our movie was wrong about everything, you know. So that would be the biggest change, I think, that Roland brought to the story was, you know, let's make it really about the succession and who is going to be king once Elizabeth dies.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest thing that Roland came up with story-wise.
Yeah, I read that this is some kind of theory that's floating around, but it's less popular than the Edward de Vere theory. I think it's called the Prince Tudor theory,
Yes,
something like
exactly.
that. So,
yeah. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think it's likely. I mean, listen, Elizabeth had sex. I mean, you know, it's possible she had children. You know, I mean, Henry VIII had bastards. I mean, they all had bastards. So it's definitely not impossible. And the whole idea of the Virgin Queen is total bullshit. She had lovers. But do I think that de Vere and Essex were her kids? Probably not. I don't believe that. And actually, even over time, I've become more of what's called a group theorist, meaning I don't think it was just de Vere. I think it was a group of people that were working at the time, you know, creating these plays. And I am sure de Vere had a lot to do with it. Personally, I think that, but not specifically necessarily how we have it in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I never really took the movie for a fact anyway. I think, like you said, it makes dramatical sense to have all these like these relationships in the movie. People are at odds, and in a way, I think that I don't know if that was your intention. The film itself feels like a Shakespearean play with all the, you know, the murder and the intrigue and there's incest and everything.
Exactly. You totally hit the nail on the head. It is supposed to be an Elizabethan play, you know, with all those things you just said, incest. I mean, that's classic, right? You know, all that stuff. That's how I could justify some of those things in my own head. And also by saying, you know, look, this really kind of drove me crazy because I don't know how much you clearly did some research. Thank you. But it was not well received, the movie. You know, I mean, people were really, really angry. I mean, I was compared to a Holocaust denier in the New York Times. In the New York Times, I was compared to a Holocaust denier. So people got, you know, really pissed off, way more than we were expecting. And I've totally lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I know what I was going to say was, you know, it's not history. It's a movie. And by the way, if you know anything about Shakespeare's history plays, they're not history either. He's changing dates. He's putting people in locations they're not really there at the time. He's got dead people talking when they're, you know, he does the same stuff, Shakespeare. You know, all of those history plays are filled with inaccuracies that helped the drama.
Mm.
And so we sort of took that as a little bit of a guiding cue,
Mm.
you know. And like you said, we wanted to make a big, loud Elizabethan drama.
Mm. Yeah, I think some people, I don't know, they kind of confuse movies with sort of a history lesson or something. Whereas I
Yeah,
don't go to the movies for facts, or if I seek any truth in them, it's supposed to be emotional truth, that kind of truth that a
exactly.
dramatist would seek, something about the human
Exactly.
condition or trying to make a
Precisely.
point.
To me, the movie is about the artistic experience. It's not about who wrote the plays. It's about what it is to be an artist, and that's what interested me in it. You know, I mean, but what's fascinating is nobody was pissed off about Shakespeare in Love because just nothing in that movie is true. Nothing.
Mm.
But it was a romantic comedy and it was all good. Whereas I read some quote from Judi Dench, who had played Elizabeth in Shakespeare in Love, and she said something about our movie, you know, and just excoriated it, you know.
Mm.
Basically said our movie was like the spawn of the devil. I don't remember the exact words, but yeah, people got really pissed off.
But could that have to do something with the marketing? Because in my research, I found a lot of discussion, and both you and Roland Emmerich discussed the ideas of, Shakespeare's authorship very seriously, and talked about how the movie sort of depicts these ideas and those ideas and everything. So, and I think people sort of reacted to it in a way as if they were supposed to be persuaded of something. Whereas with Shakespeare in Love, it was clear from the get-go that this is sort of a fantasy, just a play with
Right.
well-known figures.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people who believe Shakespeare did not write the plays, you know, and a lot of well-regarded people. Um, I am one of those people. So is Roland. So, you know, we did discuss the film as positing a legitimate question of who wrote the plays. We really had no idea how pissed off people would be. We just had no idea. There was, I think, one of the mistakes they made was the one sheet said, I actually have it over there, was Shakespeare a fraud? You know, I think that was a little too aggressive and, in your face. Interestingly, though, I mean, the film got the best reviews from some people. Like, I mean, Roger Ebert loved the film,
Mm,
said he didn't agree with a moment of it, but he loved the film, which was fine with me, you know.
mm,
Yeah, so, we wanted to have a real conversation about who wrote the plays. It's an interesting conversation to have because when you open that conversation, you're opening up a wider conversation about art and where does art come from and how does one become an artist and where does one get inspiration. And that is, at the end of the day, the basis of the anti-Stratfordian theory, right? Like
mm,
the people who don't think Shakespeare wrote the plays think that because they don't think that's how art works, right?
mm,
Uh, Meaning, listen, not a lot of people know this, but the very last book that Mark Twain ever wrote was a very small volume. I think it was published like 1909, 1910. And the whole book is why Shakespeare did not write the plays.
mhm,
And it's called "Is Shakespeare Dead?" That's the title of the book. And his basic thesis was, look, I, Mark Twain, could not have been could not have written about the Mississippi had I not been a Mississippi River pilot. That's why it's so accurate. And there is no way you can convince me, Mark Twain, that the Glover's son from Stratford, who may not even have spoken the same English as people in London, would have had the education to write the plays. Because whoever wrote the plays absolutely spoke Latin, spoke French, spoke Italian, was a lawyer. I'll just stop with those four things. Everybody agrees on those things. Please explain to me how Shakespeare was any of those things. You know, where did he learn Latin? Where did he learn Greek? Where did he learn French? Where did he learn Italian? Did he ever go to Italy? Not that we know of, but 12 of the plays are set in Italy and they're geographically accurate. So that's my point. So you start, it's about where does art come from, right? So that's why we had that kind of conversation of saying, no, it's really possible he didn't write the plays, you know? Yeah, but people were not amused.
Yeah, in a way I can understand it because he was sort of slaughtering a holy cow, especially for, students of literature. And actually, I think...
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I think this is one of the reasons that I find this movie so interesting, because it's controversial. I mean, it reminds me of a time when when a lot of movies were controversial and opened up the discussion, and that was a good thing.
Right.
That was something you actually went to a movie in order to be challenged and in order to discuss, and sometimes,
those
get
were the
angry.
days.
And yeah, the new Hollywood era is my favorite era of American filmmaking, and you have a lot of movies like this back then, and nowadays, well, not so much. And in terms of Anonymous, I think that the question of who wrote it, or is this the person or is that the person, is less interesting than what you just said. Why is it interesting? Why are we even talking about this? What does that do to our perception of the work?
Right, exactly. And that was one of the things that really interested me, because we know so little about the real Shakespeare. I mean, if you read that 400-page biography of Shakespeare, it is 3 pages of facts and 397 pages of guesswork. No, it's true. I mean, we really know nothing about the guy. I mean, for example, just listen to this. Do you know that there is not a single piece of paper that has ever been found written by William Shakespeare?
Well, I heard it in the research.
Yeah,
I did.
I mean, not a single piece of paper. You know, yeah. So how somebody becomes a writer is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the handwriting, I would, just for the sake of argument, I would say, well, maybe he didn't write it down himself. Maybe he dictated it to somebody, which I think a writer could do.
Yeah, but there's no letter to his wife. He's living in London. His wife is in Stratford, theoretically. No letter. Nothing, you know? And his children were illiterate. He didn't teach his children how to write. That's kind of odd, don't you think? You know, literally his daughter as an adult signed her name with an X. His son didn't live to adulthood, so we don't know whether he was educated or not. But what I found was, and I think particularly in America or English-speaking languages, pretty much Shakespeare is the most common read author in schools in the English-speaking world, right? Like, everybody reads Romeo and Juliet at some point in school. They don't, in America, We have The Great Gatsby, but they probably don't read The Great Gatsby in England, or what, but everybody reads Romeo and Juliet and maybe Macbeth. And so everybody has a personal relationship with Shakespeare. And it turns out everybody has a personal relationship with the idea of Shakespeare as anyone who can become a genius.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like I relate to Shakespeare because I'm a poor person from nowhere. And maybe if I write really well, I can become Shakespeare, So everybody I discovered had a really intense personal relationship with William Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. Unlike, say, if you saw Amadeus, your relationship to Mozart is very different. And obviously 80% of that movie is made up as well, but it's brilliant and it's wonderful and it explores, similar issues that we do. But nobody was pissed off about it,
I was actually thinking of a quote by Shakespeare himself from Romeo and Juliet, where it says, "What's in a name? That what we
Right.
call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet." So,
and that's ultimately, true, right? The plays are the plays are the plays,
yeah.
and they're great, whoever wrote them. But what I find interesting is if you read a play like Hamlet and the biography of Edward de Vere, the play Hamlet has way deeper meaning than if it's just written by some dude, because it's almost autobiographical, Hamlet, in terms of the relationships between Hamlet and Ophelia and what's the father-in-law, Polonius. That's literally De Vere, his wife Anne, and William Cecil. And equally, you can go into other of the plays, and rather than just saying that idea came out of thin air, you go, oh, wow, something just like that happened in Edward de Vere's life. That's interesting, So I find that interesting. Again, where does art come from? Does it come out of the ether, which one sort of has to believe if Shakespeare wrote the plays? Or does it come from life experiences,
I think the question of authorship or who the person is who actually wrote something, that's interestingly something that is also very common in your world or our world, the movie world, I think. Because when you look at the credits of a lot of films, you see names of people that, well, maybe they don't really have anything to do with the film because, the script has been rewritten so often, and then sometimes the script has been written by somebody who's not even in the credits, or, you have uncredited rewrites, this kind of thing. So kind of find it interesting because, I mean, with Shakespeare, people really care a lot about who wrote this, and with movies, usually it's something that, it's not discussed at all.
I know. Well, that goes back to France and the auteur, to Truffaut and Godard creating the auteur theory of filmmaking. I think did a great disservice. I mean, that's not to say there aren't auteurs like Kurosawa or Kubrick, but the majority of studio films are not made by auteurs. Yeah, I was, on Anonymous, I was really lucky. I was the only guy the whole time, and Roland and I developed a very close friendship that still exists. I'm writing something for him right now, another project, and I was on set for the whole filming, which not many directors allow. Most directors of Roland's stature do not want the screenwriter on set. Specifically, they do not want the screenwriter on set. And do you know why?
Well, they're afraid that the writer knows more about the film than they do.
You just won. Exactly right. And in fairness, a lot of writers don't know set etiquette and can be dicks and, put their nose in places they shouldn't be. So I can understand why a lot of writers would not be welcome on sets. But I'm not that kind of person. And Roland, we basically talked after every shot. We would kind of huddle together and say what worked and what didn't work and give ideas. That was a really incredible experience for me that writers don't normally get. I was very lucky.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit about the structure. You already said that it's a kind of a complicated structure, and I think it's very interesting because it has 4 different levels. Well, first of all, there's the framing device, like a modern day thing. Again, there's another Shakespeare quote I was thinking of that's all the world's a stage and the men and women merely players.
Exactly. That was sort of thought to, that was not unintended. That is that idea right there in the present day bookends. Absolutely. Yeah. And then we go, God, I can't even remember how many different time periods. We go into, Ben Jonson being arrested, right? And then Ben Jonson now tells us how he got into this position, right? So we go back to the 1570s or 80s. And then somehow we get into young Elizabeth. I can't even remember how we get to young Elizabeth and young de Vere. But that's kind of like
deeper and deeper into the intricacies of.
I mean, at the end of the day, I regret it, I think, because it's just a little too complicated. It's just hard to track if you're just seeing the film for the first time and you don't know that much about the time period. On the other hand, it's kind of cool. I mean, I love playing with time and that. But with that said, I think ultimately it's just a little too complicated and a little too confusing for its own good, personally. Again, my original draft was only 2 times. The movie opened with Ben Jonson being arrested, thrown in jail, and he's telling the story in the original version. He's telling the story to his jailers. I can't remember why, to get out of jail for some reason. And that's all it is. So it's just sort of one flashback of Jonson, much like Amadeus, when he's talking to the priest, and we go back and forth. Similar in my original version. Ben Jonson is telling the story, and we go back and forth between him in the jail and him telling the story of the 1590s. And then when Roland came aboard and we added all the Elizabeth stuff, we then had to add the affair that Elizabeth had with de Vere. So that meant we had to go back to that time period, so that's how that got added in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the framing device of somebody telling the story, like Ben Jonson in jail, I mean, that's, like you said, in Amadeus, it's a confession of Salieri, old Salieri to the priest.
In my version, it didn't stay this way. You didn't know whether Ben Jonson was lying or not.
Okay.
You didn't know whether the whole story was bullshit so he could get out of jail. Which I think works a little better because have out, of saying, it's true, maybe it's not true. Maybe Ben was just, lying to get out of jail. But that idea was dropped, and then the proscenium thing instead. I mean, the New York theater instead.
Mm. Yeah, but it's also, I think the effect is that I think people miss this in a way, but the effect is that, okay, this is a stage play it's a story that we're telling, and well, it may or may not be true, and we're taking some dramatic license because, I mean, we're on a stage, we're telling a story.
But people didn't take to it. I mean, the fucking Prince of Wales talked about my movie and how awful it was. I mean, it was intense how pissed off people got. Yeah, and they couldn't just sort of go with it, as you said, as just sort of a Elizabethan melodrama, which was a bummer. And, I thought the performances were really strong all around. I was sad that some of the actors didn't get a little bit more, applause or appreciation for their work. Vanessa Redgrave, in particular, was both amazing, I thought, and just wonderful to work with. She had always wanted to play Elizabeth her whole life. She'd been she played Mary, Queen of Scots, in a version of that story of Elizabeth killing Mary, but she played Mary, and she'd always wanted to play Elizabeth. So she was very excited to play Elizabeth in our film. And then obviously her daughter played the younger Elizabeth. Which was very cool. They really enjoyed doing that together. But like Reese was amazing, and God, his name, the guy who played Ben Jonson, I think, was just fantastic too. Oh, and the guy who played Robert Cecil was amazing.
Yeah, the guy's creepy.
Oh God, he's an amazing actor. Just phenomenal.
Well, I think the points that the movie is making is that literature has a special sort of power. I mean, that's something that is discussed all over again. When I watch a movie, if I'm in a movie theater, obviously I can't take any notes, but if I watch it at home, I usually hit pause and then I write, a couple of lines down. And that happened very often to me during that film. I say, well, when did words ever win a kingdom? That kind of discussion. And then the end, that is the Soul of the Age speech by Ben Jonson, where the original title comes from. Well, again, it reminded me of a Shakespeare line that, is it not marble nor gilded, the gilded monuments of princes shall outlive this powerful rhyme.
Right.
So this is something that stays with us. The art is actually that which lasts longer than what the political intrigues and everything.
And ultimately, that's what the movie is totally about, right? It's about that art, the pen is mightier than the sword, and art will out. Art is the ultimate expression of humanity. I think that's what the movie is about. My personal favorite line in the film, and it was always in there, and I'm not going to say it properly. It's when Jonson and De Vere are in the maze, the garden maze, and De Vere is trying to convince Jonson to be his beard. And De Vere says something about how his plays are political, Ben Jonson. And Jonson denies it. And De Vere says, all art is political. Otherwise, it would just be decoration. And you're not a decorator, are you? Or something like that, I can't remember the exact line, but that's the basic.
all
Basically, all
artists have
artists.
something to say, otherwise they would
Yeah,
sell shoes.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, right.
Yeah, another moment where I hit the pause button and wrote it down.
Yeah, that's my favorite line of the movie, and it's kind of like me, who I am. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
all art is political. Otherwise, it's not art. You know,
Hmm.
um, it is just decoration. So yeah, and that's what the movie's about. It's about the intersection of art and politics, and how one is actually stronger than the other. Ultimately. Um, and I think we succeeded at that. Clearly, you totally got it. I mean, I think we succeeded at that, and I wish people would understand that's what the movie's about, right?
Hmm.
It's about art's place in society. It's not about who wrote Macbeth. It's not about that.
Hmm.
Um, that's the excuse for the movie. Um, that's where we started from. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
a lot of the things that you wrote are actually dealing with politics and, well, history and politics. I think that is your
yeah.
forte.
That's my thing.
So it was
Definitely,
interesting when you say that the first version didn't really have a lot of the political stuff in it. So it's kind of
it's true.
interesting
It
to hear
didn't.
how that evolved.
It had a little bit. It definitely had a little bit. But nothing like it does. And that's one of the reasons why I embraced Roland's idea, right? Even though I didn't
Hmm.
totally buy the Tudor theory or any of that stuff. Intellectually, I saw that by adding that idea in, we could really get into this whole art and politics a little deeper. So instantly I had reservations when Roland said, yeah, I've read this book. It's about, the Prince Tudor theory. And for a second I was like, oh. And then we talked about it more, and I think was he was right. I mean, it made an interesting movie. It got into these interesting things, that I found, really exciting. And
Hmm.
yeah, most of my work, not always, but it's interesting. Even even my this movie Legend of the Guardians, which is this animated movie that Zack Snyder directed. I managed to get in there. There's a whole subtext. Have you seen the film?
Hmm. Yeah,
There's a
I
whole
have.
subtext
Got it right
about.
here.
There's a whole subtext about the reality of war
Hmm.
versus the myth of war, right? With the older owl character Ezelrib,
Hmm.
you know, trying to explain to the younger owls that reality and myth are different. And that also happens in the third act of Anonymous when the Essex Rebellion fails, right? And it turns out that a real revolution doesn't always go as well as it does in the plays.
Hmm.
That reality is different than myth.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, and then obviously there's some politics in A Mighty Heart, um, and I wrote a movie that I've taken my name off of that is also about politics called it's now being called The Last Vermeer.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a film about Han von Meegeren. Do you know who he is? He was a
No.
art forger. Um, he was this Dutch, true story, 1945, Amsterdam. The hero of the movie is this Dutch resistance fighter, true story. He's assigned the task of finding collaborators. And specifically in the art world, because as you probably know, a lot of art was stolen from Jews and then sold, blah, 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 blah. So this guy is trying to find who is doing all of that. And he finds this one guy called Han von Meegeren, who had sold all of these Vermeers to Hermann Goering. All true story. Mm-hmm. So he's arrested for being a collaborator. And he says, I'm not a collaborator. I'm a forger. Those weren't real paintings. I forged them. I ripped Hermann Goering off. I'm not a collaborator. I'm a hero. So the movie becomes, is that true or not? And again, it's about art and politics. For the first time in my life, I took my name off of a project because of where the movie ended up going in terms of that. But yeah, that's a theme that really excites me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's also the Band of Brothers episode that you wrote, the second one, Why We Fight, where the string quartet plays Beethoven at the beginning.
Yeah, that's the best thing I've ever written. That hour, in my humble opinion, I'm really proud of that. And yeah, it's about art and politics, right? It's about how can the people who gave us Beethoven give us the Holocaust? How do those two things exist in the same world, right? And if you notice, that peppered in the episode, they actually took out a few of them, are examples of Americans behaving horribly. Mm-hmm. You know, there's just to say nobody's clean. You know, I mean, granted, we weren't doing a Holocaust, but if you watch the episode, like Spears is stealing things from people, Lieutenant Spears, you know, he's stealing silver, and I mean, he's a fucking thief, you know. We have the shot where they drive by and a French soldier is summarily executing some very young German POWs on the side of the road. A couple other examples that were cut out, I think. To just say there's a lot of grays, you know. Not everything is black and white. There's a lot of grays. But yeah, I'm really proud of that episode. Yeah.
It is a very moving, well, it's just, it's very haunting, and it's, you know, I saw it, and I mean, I know all the images of the concentration camps, and I know the history of everything, but, you know, after that hour of television, it took me a couple of minutes, and then suddenly it hit me, and I was crying, actually, afterwards, just because, you know, it's so intense. And this question of how is this possible? How could anything like that be possible?
That was not an uncommon reaction. And one of the things that was super cool about it was the fact nobody saw it coming, right? You've watched 8 episodes. You haven't thought about it at all, right? You haven't even thought about Jews, really, right? You haven't thought about the Holocaust at all. It's not like you've walked into Schindler's List and you know what you're about to see, right? And so there's that, you know, for 20 minutes, the episode's almost a joke. You know, they're trying to get laid, and then suddenly, boom, you know, and I think one of the reasons the episodes work so well is because you, the audience, have that same coming out of left field. What the fuck is this? You know, I mean, obviously you guess what it is, but it still kind of is a sucker punch, you know, because you weren't expecting it, just like they weren't expecting it. And then also, I think the two best, I mean, I loved everybody, but the two best directed episodes of Band are that episode 9 and episode 7, both of which were directed by David Frankel. Those are the only two he directed. And I think they're the two best episodes of the show. 7 is the second one in Bastogne, where Spears does the run. He runs across and then he runs back. Remember that scene? It's really great. But David did a fantastic job. That first shot in the opening, that's all in my script, but I didn't write it as a single shot, so he has that gigantic crane shot that, starts with the Germans playing and the quartet and the one-legged guy. All that's in the script. And then, he just comes up in a single shot to see living, all the guys. It was just beautiful, The whole episode he just directed beautifully.
I kind of developed this.
Feel the same. Oh, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say I did not feel the same about my other episode.
Oh, okay. Okay, now I'll have to ask you about this. What was it about the other episode that bothered you?
The director and I had a lot of differences of opinions. Yeah. It came out fine. It came out fine. People loved the episode. I would argue that it could have been a hell of a lot better. But yeah. Yeah, it was weird. I had a really bad experience on that one. Anyway, there it is.
So you had a bad experience, but also
exactly
one of the best things that you've done, the thing that you're most proud of.
Exactly.
Both in the same show.
Yeah, and listen, I had a great experience the whole time. It was amazing, and this never ever happened to me again. I was really lucky. So I wrote episode 2, and it wasn't run like a TV show. TV shows, there's like a room and you all sit together and you kind of, you know what I mean? You know how those TV shows work? This was 10 movies. So literally, I'm talking to Tom about some other project in 98, late 98. It's a project that never happened. And he suddenly turns to me and he says, because every time I had met with him in the preceding 2 months, we'd had 2 or 3 meetings about this other project. And I would say to him, Tom, I am a huge World War II fan. And if you ever need any writers on that, I would love to be part of it. And he's like, no, we're going to have one writer. He's going to do the whole thing. It's like, okay, cool. So I'm in this meeting, and he suddenly turns to me and he says, you still want to write for Band of Brothers? And I go, yeah. And he says, you want to write the D-Day episode? And I go, okay. I'm hired to write the D-Day episode. Now remember, this is my first paying job as a screenwriter. And I am writing the D-Day episode for Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg 2 years after Saving Private Ryan was made. I was really intimidated. Anyway, so I write the script, agonizing, send it to Tom, and in the original draft, when the guys are in the C-47 in the plane, in the original version I wrote, they were not silent. They were singing songs, which is what they really did. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them did. They sang songs to try to get their morale up, right? So I had them singing some song. And then everything kind of as is. And so Tom calls me up and he says, I read your script. Okay. He's like, Steven read it too. He doesn't like the singing. I'm like, okay, I'll take out the singing. What else? That's it. You want to do another one? I go, okay. How about the concentration camp episode? Okay. Now remember, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Schindler's List. So, so now you thought I was intimidated before. Now I'm writing episode 9, which was super hard because actually, unlike almost any other part of the show, most of that comes from me because the guys didn't talk to Stephen Ambrose about, it was called Landsberg. It was a satellite of Dachau. They wouldn't talk about Landsberg. So it's only like a paragraph in the book. So it was really hard. I spent weeks and weeks trying to interview the guys and trying to get more and learning more and blah, 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 blah. Finally write it. I can't even tell you how stressed I am. And in it, when the guys come to open up the camp in my original draft, they had put up an American flag, which also happened. The prisoners found things, and would build or sew a flag to welcome their liberators. So turn in the script. A week or two goes by. I get a phone call from Tom. Stephen read the script. He wept. He only wants you to take the flag out. Take out the flag, and then we're done. And so my 2 first drafts were basically the shooting drafts for those 2 episodes. Now, that has never happened to me again, obviously. And most of the other scripts and bands were clusterfucks and were rewritten by this writer and rewritten by that writer. I'm the only writer who wasn't rewritten on Band. Episode 1, I don't know how many different writers took a whack at it. Episode 3 was just Max. Nobody rewrote Max. Episode 4 was Bruce, Graham, Eric. Episode 5 was mostly Eric. I mean, anyway, episode 6, that was another 1 million people writing on it. So, yeah, it was a really intense experience. Never to be repeated, by the way. I've never had, I don't have any notes for you ever again. Yeah, boy, was I spoiled.
It's kind of the dream of every writer.
Oh.
Say, yeah, this is perfect. Don't change a thing.
From Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, I still can't believe it sometimes, I mean, it's like magic, Yeah,
it's amazing.
And, and I'm working with them now. We're doing Masters of the Air, which is like the third, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, and now Masters of the Air. And I've spent 7 years working on it with Tom and Steven.
Wow.
So, yeah. It's going to be very different from Band, very different process, going to be a very different show. Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of cool, I mean, I've worked with Tom off and on for 22 years,
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, obviously not everything is, the only thing that's gotten made that I've worked on with him was Band, but I've written 4 other scripts for him. And then Masters, Jesus, I've written 800 pages so far.
You have another project coming up. I don't know what the status on that one is. The story of the Watergate.
Yeah, it did not happen. It didn't happen.
Oh, it didn't?
No, I mean, I wrote 3 scripts, and they decided not to make it. Now, Netflix is making a similar project, and somehow I'm listed on the IMDb page for that.
Okay.
But I'm not part of that. My version was different and was at CBS All Access, the
Mm-hmm.
cable CBS. Mine was sort of almost a satire, and I think the version they're doing is very straight on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. A
Yeah,
satire in what regard? How would that have looked?
it would have looked a little bit like a little bit like what was the Cheney movie from a couple years ago?
Oh, Vice.
Vice. I mean, not quite that, cutting
Mm-hmm.
away to crazy shit, but a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
These people were really, I mean, until the current administration of crazy, right? I mean, like, no, I mean, the people around Trump put the Watergate people to shame.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so. I mean, it is satire. Yeah, I mean, you can't go anywhere with the Trump people because it's already
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous. You know, that's one of the reasons why I think we didn't end up making the project. Because it's like it's hard to make satire when you're living through something significantly more satirical. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, but the Watergate, there was a bunch of goofy people. They were just goofballs, and they were in way over their heads, and it was just a clusterfuck. So there is a funny sort of dark comedy in the Watergate story,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we're living through such a even worse, darker version that I don't want to see it. Truly, there's no reason I would want to see a Watergate movie right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to get through the fucking crazy of today.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I know
um,
what you mean. I just recently said, I don't know who I was talking to, but I said, well, the things that are happening now, they make Nixon look presidential in comparison. I
yeah,
mean, this looks like he looks like a class act in comparison. He had the decency to step back.
absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I could go on and on and on. Um, but you know, yeah. So that project is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Really, I'm focusing Masters of the Air is just enormous. The scale of it is enormous. The point of the show is to show the scale, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I can't really talk too much about it. Apple has an NDA with me
Mm-hmm.
on it. I signed an NDA, but it's not telling you too much to say that we sort of start with a group of people around 1943, and at that point you could send up a full mission would be about 80 B-17s, right? A
Mm-hmm.
maximum effort. Everything we've got, let's throw everything we've got, and it's like 87 B-17s going over the channel. By D-Day, it's 900 B-17s. By 45, it's 1,300 B-17s. It would take hours for the planes to go overhead when they were
Mm-hmm.
passing your village. If you were living in, I don't know, Nuremberg or, Hamburg or wherever, and if you were on the route, it would be 90 minutes of planes just flying and flying. I mean, the scale is unfucking believable. You know,
Mm-hmm.
at the height of the war, at the height of the war, the Americans had 80,000 airplanes functioning.
Wow.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine. Right
Yeah.
now, we have maybe, I don't know, 1,000. You know, it's impossible to imagine the scale of the air war. It's going to be It's really gonna it's really gonna be fucking good.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to it. That would be
Thanks.
a good reason to subscribe to Apple TV.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But my point is, that's been consuming most, not entirely, but most of the
Hmm.
last 5 years. I mean, I did make that other movie, the last Vermeer, that I took my name off of, but and it's going to be 2 more years to make
Hmm.
Masters. We haven't started shooting yet, and because of the virus,
Mm.
it's kind of, well, when will we shoot exactly? So we're still figuring it out. But so I'll be working on Masters of the Air quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
it's sort of my full-time gig for the next year or two,
Hmm.
and loving
Wow.
every minute of it. I mean, really, like, when I worked on Band, I mean, it really was the greatest experience of my life. I mean, I'm a World War II nut, always have been. It was amazing. I mean, it really was amazing. You would go on the set, and they rented an airfield about an hour north of London called Hatfield. It used to be an old RAF airfield, and it had several hangars. We didn't use it as an airfield. We used it as like a movie studio. So the
Hmm.
hangars were retrofitted for different purposes. So like one hangar, and I mean a big fucking airplane hangar, you'd walk in and that would be vehicles. So there's 6 tanks, 7 Jeeps, all these fucking cool cars. Or you'd go into another building and it was costumes. And it was just, and then another room, armaments, with all the gun. It was just, the scale was, there was 1,000 people working on it. I mean, it was
Hmm.
just insane. And I thought I would never have that experience again. And yet here I am, about to have that experience again.
Hmm.
So I feel pretty lucky in that regard.
Mm. Yeah, you are lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing project. Yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks.
I have this theory that this Band of Brothers episode, Why We Fight,
Hmm.
that's kind of like the the essence of your your stories. The idea of why is the thing that we're discussing in this particular story important? Why are we fighting for this? Um, I think
Thank
I
you.
noticed a little bit of that and all of the things and everything I've seen that you wrote. Um,
Thank you. I think that's true. Thank you. I feel seen. I feel understood.